Oh, and it's automatically being recorded.
Oh, good.
Oh, I seem to have lost my closed caption button.
Hi, everyone. We're just kind of getting started and we'll start in a few minutes. I just want to give folks a chance to file in. 22 already. It's awesome. Yeah, we'll give folks maybe just a couple more minutes and then we'll get started.
Ellen, you don't see the closed captioning button, do you?
Let me see. I did, so I clicked it. I don't know if it did anything. Folks might be able to choose that on their end as well. I'm not sure. Okay, we've got 32 people. Maybe just one more minute and see if we can figure out this closed caption thing.
Is anybody in the audience seeing any live closed caption transcription by chance? Thank you, Summer. I wonder what this live transcript button is.
That might be it.
Scared. I'm gonna press it.
Well, while you're fiddling with that, I'm gonna go ahead and introduce you. Well, actually, I'll do some. I see something now. Yay. Oh, I see myself talking. Oh no. Okay, try not to let that distract me. Okay, so yeah, first I'll actually make a few announcements. So hi everyone, I am Ellen Pimentel. I am the chapter president for Sacramento Valley chapter. Welcome back to our fall speaker series. We're really excited to have folks joining us. We're going to stick to virtual for the rest of the fall, I believe, unless things drastically change in the next few months, and then we'll reevaluate. But this seems to work pretty well, and we are excited to get back to in-person events, but we want to make sure it's safe for everybody. So with that, I just want to acknowledge that we did attempt to launch our fall plant sale today, and we know that the website went down several times. We've been working behind the scenes frantically and diligently to try and get this fixed for you all. All I can really do right now is apologize. I know it's frustrating and disappointing, and we want to get the plants out to you as much as you want to get the plants. So we are working hard to fix it, and you know, as in the past, try to learn from what's happening now and make sure this doesn't happen next time. So look for announcements, or just keep trying the site. But as of right now, I think it's still down, but we will announce once we've got it back up and running. So that's my main announcement. And thanks for everybody sending us feedback and letting us know what's going on with the site. So I think I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first speaker, Lesley Hamamoto. We have two speakers today, and I'm going to let Lesley introduce our second speaker, Dylan, and he will talk after Lesley. So Lesley works for the California Department and botanist. She previously worked at UC Davis for the Department of Plant Biology and the UC Davis Botanical Conservatory. She is a lifelong Sacramento area resident and our current chapter secretary. And she's temporarily taking over the speaker scheduling for our fall chapter meetings. And she's also our first speaker, which is wonderful. But we are looking for someone to take over after the holidays. And so, yeah, if anyone would like to help us out with our speaker series, it's really a fun job task to take on. You get to know a lot of folks that do really interesting things and help bring their knowledge to our members. So please let us know. Once our website is back up, you'll find our email addresses there. And let's see, I'll plug the next two meetings. October, we have Derek Bergheimer talking about container gardening with natives. And then in November, we have Nita Winter and Rob Badger, who will be talking about their title of their presentation is The Making of Beauty and the Beast, California Wildflowers and Climate Change. And yeah, Lesley has an amazing garden, and I'm really excited about this presentation. So with that, please take it away, Lesley.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to mention first, thank you, Mike Brady, for putting this information in the chat for us. If you are looking for the closed captioning, you should turn on the meeting controls in the general tab under your settings and look for live transcript and choose show subtitles. So for anybody looking for that, that should be available for you. Let's see, we're gonna attempt to share screen correctly here. Okay. Ellen, are you and Dylan, can you guys see my screen? I just want to make sure that everything goes properly. Okay, great.
I can see it.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so the title of my presentation is If You Build It, They Will Come. I started my home native garden about 10 years ago, and this is some of the results. And I most of the, I think except for one photo in this presentation, they're all mine. They're all my photos taken on my iPhone. So my my phone is pretty much jammed full of flower and cat photos. Oh, and you know what? I'm gonna turn off my video for a minute, or for duration of my presentation, so that you can see all those photos. All right. I purchased my home back in 2010, and this picture on the left is the picture that I stole from Zillow when it was being sold. That was the original garden. It was very neat and tidy and well maintained, but in my opinion, it was kind of boring. So I really wanted to make that conversion to natives. I am located in suburban Sacramento. I'm in the Pocket area. which is located off of I-5 south of downtown, for those who may not be familiar with this area. I'm located close to the Sacramento River. I'm, within walking distance. In 2012, I started removing the lawn. Actually, I didn't remove the lawn. My boyfriend very kindly took out a lot of it using a mattock. I still hear complaints about that probably messing up his back for the next several years. So part of it, I did end up hiring somebody with a sod cutter, and they just came out and took out the lawn. The lawn is primarily Bermuda grass, which is notoriously difficult to remove and control. But it's been pretty good, I think, because my soil is pretty clayish. So it's been manageable. So like I said, in 2010, I started removing existing shrubs and the lawn and planting natives. So some of the goals that I had for my garden design were mainly to support pollinators, but that was not the only purpose. I really wanted to have a collection of plants that remind me of certain places and certain people. And so I had these sort of, more than one goal. And so I did not restrict myself to using hyperlocal native species. That just wasn't something that was a top priority for me personally. The photo in the top left is me out in the desert sniffing a creosote bush. That is one of the characteristic smells of the desert. And so, some of those experiences are things that I wanted to try to replicate in my own yard. And so for that reason, I sourced plants from native nurseries that, are all over the state. We're very lucky now that we are starting to get more local native nurseries, but it's kind of been a slow process. But the more people we have doing native gardening, the more available those plants are going to be. A little bit about the conditions that I have in my particular garden. I am located on a corner lot, which faces north and west. My lot is only about 4,000 square feet, so it's fairly small. Like I said, I have clay soil, and I do have some issues with drainage. My backyard is pretty small and is hardscaped with impermeable patio, and so the drainage from the entire back of my house comes out through one 4-inch drain pipe to my front yard. And so that was an opportunity for me that I wanted to take advantage of and to develop this ephemeral swale that you can see in the second photo from the left. And that swale, basically, if we have hard rains, it'll fill up and it'll drain slowly over maybe 12 to 24 hours, depending on the amount of rain. Prior to putting in that swale, I would just have a river off the slope of my front yard. So that was something that I wanted to do, and I've been really happy with that. Again, my boyfriend very nicely engineered, in quotation marks, engineered that swale for me. Let's see. So the other side of my garden is primarily west facing. It's very hot. It's in full sun for most of the day. And the plants that are located against the house do get a lot of reflected heat from that wall. So it's pretty brutal conditions. So particularly on that side of the house against the wall, I did focus on heat and drought tolerant shrubs that once they were established, I pruned them up to be able to underplant. But I think if I had planted a lot of those initially, it might have just gotten fried. So that was kind of one of the tactics that I used to mediate some of the problems on that side of the house. Some of the plants that I have collected from various nurseries around the state. 10 years ago when I started this garden, it felt like the dark ages of native plant retailers. I made trips down to Las Politas, down in Santa Margarita. I've purchased plants from East Bay Regional Park's Botanic Garden, many other places around the Bay and in Sonoma. But now there are a lot more local options. In our Sacramento Native Gardening Facebook group, there are lots of resources that are available to you if you are looking for native plant sources. One thing that I will mention about shopping around for native plants, many counties in the sort of coastal range are in the sudden oak death quarantine zone. There are nurseries that have been tested and authorized to sell outside of the quarantine zone, but there are some that do not allow sales from quarantined counties to non-quarantined counties. So that's something that you do need to keep in mind as you're looking for places to buy plants. In this photo here, I've got Padre Shooting Star that I started from seed. That I purchased at East Bay Regional Park's Botanic Garden. Those flowers took about 9 years from seed to flower. So it was really exciting when they first flowered last year, I think. The center is a variety of sticky monkey flowers that I have in my yard. Some of them have been purchased as varietals. A lot of them are hybrids or seedlings that have shown up from both Diplochus auranticus, so the straight yellow sticky monkey flower that is normally seen around Sacramento, and Penelope, which is a cultivar from Las Politas. It's a cultivar from the southern redder forms of sticky monkey flower, and I've just ended up with this great variety of different colors and forms. That's really fun to see. In the bottom right corner, I have Iris longipetala that I purchased from Las Politas. I am really, when this one blooms, it's always one of my favorites because they're so pretty, and it is one of our rare plants that occurs in our sort of coastal foothills. So it's nice to have some cool rare plants that maybe other people don't necessarily realize are extra cool, but I know. And so it's extra exciting for me. Some of the other plants that I have, this is starting from the top left, we've got Yankee Point ceanothus, Western azalea. In the middle, there is a form of sticky monkey flower called grape. And that was from California Flora Nursery in Sonoma. Pacific Coast hybrid irises. And one of the plants that has worked really well for me in the shade in the bottom right corner is the small green leaved yerba buena. It's a pretty fragrant mint that spreads pretty well. Even without much water, it is on the north side of my house, so it's not full sun, and it does get some shade, but it does really, really well. It's a really nice, bright green, pretty dense ground cover. And then lately, because my yard is so full, I've really gotten into bulbs. Again, from the top left, we've got one leaf onion. Below that is Ithuriel spears, which is Tritolea laxa. Center, there's camas lilies, and I have a few different species of Dicolostoma, which I guess are Dipterostemen now, and soaproot on the far right. And all of these bulbs, they do better with very limited summer watering, which is one of the things that is part of the maintenance of my yard. Is I do pretty minimal supplemental watering. During the summer, I'll maybe spray everything down, primarily to get rid of the buildup of cobwebs, and to wash any dust or ash with our fires that we've been having every summer, just to kind of get all of my plants cleaned more so than putting a lot of water into the soil. Some of the bulbs that are available, Calicortus, in particular, I wanted to mention, they get hammered by snails and slugs, but the ones that I've shown here are pretty resilient, and I have not had issues with pests. Oops, did I miss one? There we go. So for most of us, and I've included these quotes just as kind of something to think about while I'm talking. But for most of us, a garden is not a restoration project. While we can definitely support pollinators and wildlife with our plant choices and management practices, we're still working in the confines of developed areas. And often we're working on very small parcels that we have limited control over the surroundings. So on most residential yards, the hydrology is not natural. So the water that is coming onto your site is not from a natural source other than rainfall, and how that rainfall is drained away from your house is not natural. The heat effects that we get from road asphalt and our houses are not natural. We often have edge effects due to how your neighbor cares for their yard. If they're if they are watering a lawn, or if they have a pest control service, those are things that are all having some influence on your yard. But that being said, in my experience, planting native plants has a huge impact on the insect diversity that you will see in your yard. And, to varying degrees, that will also benefit other wildlife. I've always had an interest in insects, especially plant-insect interactions. And one of my favorite pastimes is wandering around the garden. And, pre-pandemic, this was mostly after I got home from work in the evening. But during work from home, during the early part of the pandemic, that happened in early March. So it was kind of peak time for garden at my house. And that allowed me a lot more time during the day to, take a little break and go outside in the garden and see what was blooming and see what was visiting. And I would say that definitely saved my mental health through, what for everybody was a very stressful time. So some of the insects that I get in my yard, we're going to start off with bumblebees, and Dylan will be talking about these very charismatic bees next after I'm done with my talk. But some of the ones that I've seen in my yard are shown here. I've observed 5 different species in my yard. Those include the California bumblebee, which I don't think you guys can see my pointer. I'm not sure if you can, but we've got
I see
California.
it. It's small, but I see it.
Yep. All right. So the California bumblebee is this one right here. It's identified by its black face as opposed to some of the others that have a yellow face. And among the 5 that I have in my yard, there are, of course, that black and yellow face is basically the 2 options between all of the bumblebees in California. But yeah, so this one is the California bumblebee. We also have the Van Dyke's bumblebee, which is shown here and here. And the yellow-faced bumblebee, or the Bombus vosnesensky, which is this one and this one. So the distinguishing characters between Van Dyke's and vosnesensky are the vosnesensky has a sort of smaller segment of black at the end of its abdomen compared to the Van Dyke. So not super distinctive, and I had to get confirmation from Dylan earlier today to make sure that I was correctly identifying those. This yellow guy right here is actually also a Van Dyke's bumblebee, most likely. This is the male. So these other bumblebees are females. You can see that they have these large pollen accumulations on their hind legs. And Dylan's going to be talking about this more as well. But this guy is a male, and they look very distinct from the females. All right, now I need to get back over to my presentation. There we go. All right, the other two species that I've had in my yard are the black-tailed bumblebee, which is this guy and this guy. All the other ones that I've already shown you also have black tails, but this one is specifically called the black-tailed bumblebee. And the most exciting bumblebee that I had in my yard this year is the cropped bumblebee, named after an entomologist named Robert Crotch, I believe. And this species is actually petitioned for listing under the California Endangered Species Act right now. And so to see that I have attracted endangered bumblebees to my yard through the planting of native plants was pretty exciting. Oh, and I wanted to mention the bumblebee that is on the brick background, that was captured and chilled and photographed as part of my participation with the California Bumblebee Atlas, which Dylan will be talking about. So handling and doing all of that is authorized under that citizen science project. Other types of bees that I have in my yard, other large bees, these are the carpenter bees. I have seen two species, and I think we only have two species native to sort of northern and central California. The third, I don't think, comes this far up. We have the foothill carpenter bee, which is the one, the individuals on the two left photos. The yellow-headed and blue-eyed individuals are males, and the female is black. And on the right, we have the black female valley carpenter bee and the golden-colored male valley carpenter bee. The male valley carpenter bees are often called golden teddy bears, partly because of how they look and partly because they do not sting. So like all male bees, they are unable to sting. Other bees that I have encountered in my yard include the wool carder bee, this guy right here. That one is actually not a native species, but they do, and that's not a native plant either. But I do get them quite a bit, and they're pretty common in our area. So I thought I would mention. Of course, we've got the ubiquitous European honeybee, and we've got some mason bees. So these are bees that live or that will nest in cavities. So things like hollow plant stems, or holes that have been bored into untreated wood, things like that. And then on the bottom here, we've got a leafcutter bee in the family Megachilidae. And one of the identifying characters of the megachilid bees is that they carry their pollen that they collect from flowers on their abdomen. So instead of being on their hind legs like the bumblebees or the honeybees, they pack it onto the underside of their abdomen. Pollen is needed for larval provisioning primarily, and so larval bees don't feed exclusively on nectar. We always think about bees and pollinators looking for nectar, but a lot of these bees are collecting pollen. So here we've got some of our smaller bees. We've got, let's see, and I am not an entomologist by any means. I do try really hard, but if any of my IDs are incorrect, I do not claim to be an expert. We've got a few different species here. So we've got more mason bees. We've got a chimney bee. And these are often found on flowers in the sunflower family. We've got longhorned bees, which are, oh, sorry, this one, I think this one is the longhorned bee, and then this one might be the chimney bee. And we've also got a couple species of furrow bees. They're part of the sweat bee family. Most of our native bees are also solitary ground nesters. So the photo on the far left here shows a male Andrena bee, so a mining bee, emerging from a burrow. It's probably looking for a mate. So the females will, hang out in burrows. Males will fly around to different burrows looking for mates, or looking for them to emerge from their pupa that have overwintered. The reason that this one is a male is because it has a little yellow lower part of its face right there, and that is one of the identifying characters. We've also got some little tiny mining bees and more chimney bees. So next was my collection of weird bees that I found in my yard. This guy is kind of creepy looking, but he is, or she, I guess, is a cuckoo bee. And cuckoo bees actually lay their eggs in the nests of other bees. So instead of creating their own nest, they will drop their eggs into another species nest, and their larvae will then parasitize the baby bees in that nest. We've also got some male longhorned bees. This is something that is pretty cool to come across. The males they don't hang out in a nest, and so like the females potentially would. And so in the evening, the males will aggregate usually on some vegetation, and they just all kind of like, this is where we're sleeping for the night. And so this is a little pile of sleepy male longhorned bees. We've also got a sand wasp here. And I mentioned earlier I had chimney bees. This is the opening for a nest of a chimney bee. So they create this little turret, like castles have the little turrets that stick up at the top. These are called turrets, and that is a chimney bee nest. There's also a lot of insects that exhibit bee mimicry that are not bees. These are all flies, and flies are also very effective pollinators, and the larvae of some of these, the hoverflies in particular, their larvae are predators on some of our pest insects. So like the syrphid flies will often lay their eggs on flowers that have aphids or other pests on them, and the larvae will go around and eat all of those aphids, similar to the way ladybug larvae would. Flies can be distinguished from bees by their very large eyes that look a little bit different than bee eyes. And they also have these little teeny tiny sort of short antennae compared to the longer bee antennae that we think of. Of course, some of the most well-known pollinators that we think of include the moths and butterflies. And while we think about butterflies visiting flowers for nectar, it's equally important to provide their larval host plants And those larval host plants may be completely different from the flowers that the adults will use for feeding. And we really need to make sure that, both are available in order to support the life cycle of these species. In this photo, we've got a gray hair streak. This is a Western pygmy blue. We've got I think this is a West Coast lady, which is similar to the painted lady, but it is a different species. This one is called a mournful dusky wing. And then we've got the very iconic monarch butterfly, which I had lay eggs and have caterpillars in my yard for the first time this year since 2015. So hoping for some better population rebound for monarchs. Other butterflies that I also get are the fiery skipper. These actually, their larvae eat the roots of lawns. So these are not necessarily, their larval form is not dependent on native plants, but they do very much appreciate native nectar resources. We've also got the Gulf fritillary butterfly, which is again not native. The larvae feed on passiflora vines, which are not native to California, but they're a large, pretty butterfly that may be seen and confused for monarchs. We have the white-lined sphinx moth. These are nocturnal moths, very large, and they really like flowers that open in the evening. This is the California evening primrose that you can actually sit out in the evening and watch each flower bloom, which is really cool. We have the mint moth and the orange sulfur butterfly, which we often get very, very large migrations coming through areas, especially when they are harvesting the alfalfa fields. Alfalfa is one of the larval host plants, and so we'll get quite big populations of the orange sulfur butterflies. And we also have a Melissa blue butterfly. Oh, sorry, I meant to give everybody a warning. I do have spiders on the next slide, on this slide, but I tried to pick all the cute ones. These are crab spiders, and over here in the top right, we've got the gold jumper, which is probably one of my favorite spiders, if you can have a favorite spider. I also get my fair share of black widows in my yard, but I did not include a picture of one of those. Next, I wanted to talk about some of the insects that we might consider to be pests that will also come to your native garden. These insects are still part of the ecosystem that you're creating. And, in generally, I refrain from using pesticides or even implementing control measures such as washing bugs off with water, because this can sometimes be more disruptive to developing more long-term control. Most of the predator insects are not going to breed as quickly as the pest insects. So if you kill one predator bug, that's that many more pest bugs that are going to then reproduce. So I really have had very few pest issues that have needed any sort of intervention from me. I'll talk a little bit about some of the predators that we get, but some of the pests that I have observed in my yard are these little, you can see the little eggs that look like cinnamon rolls, like unbaked cinnamon rolls. Those are stink bug eggs. We have crane flies. Their larvae will again eat plant roots. These are milkweed bugs, so they are very specialized to eat milkweed seeds. So that could be, if you're trying to expand your population of milkweed, those could be seen as pests, but they're very cool bugs, and they're part of this cycle. And then we've also got some fungus gnats, which people who grow houseplants know what fungus gnats are, and those are not necessarily your friends, but they are great pollinators outside. Hopefully they just don't infest your houseplants. The last one that I want to mention is the Genista broom moth. And so this particular caterpillar feeds on plants in the legume family, and lupins are in the legume family. And these Genista broom moths can show up in huge numbers. And this is the one the one insect that I did end up attempting some control on this year. This is the first year they've showed up in my yard, but they completely defoliated 3 fairly large lupin shrubs in my yard. So I am trying to do a little bit of control. First, I was just removing the caterpillars, but I did end up last week using some BT spray. And the way that I went about it was, I checked to make sure that I didn't see any other susceptible caterpillars on my plants. I tried to be very, very careful about overspray and just applying it on the lupin that was affected. And BT is I think most people are familiar with this now, but it is a bacteria that affects the digestion of caterpillars. So it is very specific to caterpillars, and it is very short acting. So the sort of bioactivity of the bacteria is pretty short, maybe a day or two, and the caterpillars have to eat the bacteria for it to be effective. So trying to pick something that is very specific and very short acting to just deal with the problem and not have long-lasting effects. I left these broom moths on my plants for probably close to a month before I decided I needed to do something if I wanted to save my lupin plants. And we'll talk about lupins a little bit later, but they are very, very attractive to other pollinators. And so I would hate to lose my lupins. So other predators, natural predators in your garden, I have here the 7-spotted lady beetle. Those are not native. They are often sold in garden centers and things for pest control. They're generalist predators, and so they may or may not, have detrimental effects on our natives. I'm not going to discourage them from my yard, but I'm also not going to go and buy them. This leafhopper assassin bug in the next photo will attack and eat other prey insects, I think mostly soft-bodied insects. Praying mantis, again, are another generalist predator. A few years ago, I did have one monarch butterfly in my yard, and the way that I knew that was because there was a single monarch butterfly wing that had been eaten and dropped by a praying mantis. So that was a little bit depressing. This last photo is of a parasitoid wasp. And these parasitoid wasps, actually, they're tiny. And they lay their eggs in aphids, and those eggs will then hatch out, kill the aphid, and then produce what's called the remains of the aphid will be what is called an aphid mummy. And it's like it looks like a little shiny gold seed, kind of. And if you see those, you don't want to do any aphid treatment, because those are your baby wasps that are going to hatch out and attack any remaining aphids. So if you were to, use any sort of pesticide or even physical control, such as spraying them off, you could be killing those wasps who are your predators of your pests. Sorry, I've got my pointer moving around all over here. I'm trying to navigate a couple different screens. So as you're planning your own garden, one thing to think about, and I think this is a really good approach, is that there are no gardening mistakes. They're only experiments. You can always, replant something. You can always do something a little bit different. There are very few things that are permanent in your yard. And after going through my own yard conversion, I feel like I've figured out some of the things that are important as far as planning, and things that I did consider, and I'm very glad that I had the experience to be able to sort of think about those things ahead of time. And there are also some things that, I didn't think of that I wish I had, but ultimately there are no mistakes. You just move on. So I think some of the key things for garden planning are to, first of all, identify your goals. What do you want from your garden? Most people are, get into native garden because they want to support wildlife or pollinator habitat. And for that, I feel like how you manage your garden is the most important factor. Minimizing pesticide or excluding pesticide use, maintaining some leaf litter, and also you have to have sort of realistic expectations. So if you're gardening for pollinators and wildlife, you should expect that some of your plants are going to be eaten. They're not going to necessarily look perfect all the time. A lot of people, of course, are looking at drought tolerant. And certain plants will be much more drought tolerant under different soil conditions. So for instance, in my yard, with clay soil, I can get away with watering a lot less than at my dad's house, which I'm currently converting, and he has much sandier soil. And if he were to use the same watering regime that I am using, even though a lot of the plants are the same, he gets a very different result. So that's something that you should consider. Depending on your soil, your garden may or may not be as drought tolerant, or it could be more drought tolerant than you would expect. Plant diversity, for pollinators, plant diversity helps a lot. Making sure that you have things blooming or growing in different seasons is really important. It not only attracts a diversity of insects, but it helps them to stay around longer by providing resources over a longer period. And lastly, design. If having the design of your garden should be one of your goals, and how you design it is up to you. The way that I think about it, it's like, if your grandmother grew hybrid tea roses and you really want to have hybrid tea roses as part of your native garden, do that. This is your yard. But those non-native plants should be treated like sort of abiotic factors in your yard. The same way you would look at a statue, or if you like pink plastic flamingos in your yard, they are not contributing, but have them if you want them. That's my personal philosophy. Before you start buying your plants, you definitely want to consider soil type. As I mentioned, your soil type is going to really affect your watering regime. And certain plants also do not do well in clay soil, or they do not grow to the same size as the same plant that was planted in a different soil type, a sandier soil type, for instance. As an example, the plant in the middle here, right here, is a desert willow. And I thought, desert willow, should work well for the hot side of my house, even though, I don't do a lot of supplemental watering, and, they often grow in sort of riparian areas in the desert. I think it's primarily because of my clay soil. This plant, probably 7 years later, is smaller now than when it was planted. It hasn't died, but it definitely is not thriving. So next, thinking about sun exposure. Not only what your current sun exposure is, but if you're planting, larger shrubs or trees, how those are going to affect the available sun exposure for other plants. So for instance, if you, have large shrubs, you can, you don't necessarily want to put full sun plants on the shady side of a large shrub. Next, watering is something to consider. How much watering do you want to do? Are you expecting to, do hand watering? Are you going to have a sprinkler or drip system? In my yard, I left the existing sprinkler system, but I don't use it, and I exclusively hand water. That's just how I've chosen to do it, and my soil type lets me do that. And so, once a month or so, I drag out the hose and spray off the spider webs. How much maintenance do you want to do? Do you want to do a lot of pruning? If you don't, then you might not want to plant, 30 large shrubs that are going to overgrow your space. I have chosen to do that, and so I do a fair amount of pruning. And lastly, how are you going to access your yard for watering or maintenance or things like that? And I do highly recommend including pathways to allow for easy access to your plants. But like I said, beyond that, have an idea, figure out, what your goals are, but everything will kind of work out on its own. So how to bring your design to life and get others on board with your plan. I think a lot of us get very interested in native plants, and then, you have to convince your spouse or explain to the neighbors what you're doing. And one sort of easy way that I have found to produce some designs to share with others is I'll do a screen capture from Google Earth, or if you want to take a photo of your house, I drop it into PowerPoint, and then I just use PowerPoint shapes to kind of indicate where I want to have different planting beds or different hardscape features. And that's just kind of a good way to give yourself an idea of what this is going to look like once things fill in. Because, when you are starting your native garden and you've basically got, a yard completely covered in what looks like, shaved Snuffleupagus fir, and you've got a couple of little tiny green twigs out there, it's really, really hard to picture what it's going to look like once things grow in. And so having a sort of, mocked up idea of what you want and how you want to place things is, for me, really helpful. I've also done some more professional designs also in PowerPoint. And this can help other people who may not be as focused on the intrinsic value of native plants to be able to understand your vision. This design was something that I did for a friend of mine who was trying to get her HOA to give approval for a lawn conversion to native plants. Another suggestion that I have is putting out some signage or a design plan, in your yard during the sort of conversion process to help your neighbors, know that you have a plan and that it's not going to look as crazy as it might initially. So this is one of my favorite quotes. Money can't buy happiness, but it can buy plants, and that's pretty much the same thing. So this is the part that everyone looks forward to. And I have prepared a little list of my 6 must-have recommendations. This is based on my own experience, of course, but my favorites include salvias of many different types. Let's see, in my yard, I've got bees bliss sage and hummingbird sage and different varieties of Cleveland sage. And this one is actually one that's not commonly available, and I wish it was more available. This is Vicky Romo hybrid sage. This is the whole plant up here, and it's a hybrid of white sage and Cleveland sage. So it looks structurally similar to white sage, is a little bit smaller, I would say, than white sage, and instead of white flowers, it has these lavender flowers. All of these are really, really attractive to pollinators. They have great fragrance, tons of blooms. Not only do I get bees and butterflies, but the hummingbirds love them. They're really great. Next on my list is milkweed. Everybody wants monarchs in their yard. They're just one of the iconic pollinators, and milkweed is necessary for monarchs. In my yard, I mostly have showy milkweed. The other native species in the Sacramento area is narrowleaf milkweed. I have not had much success growing narrowleaf milkweed. Friends of mine have not had success growing showy milkweed. In my yard, the showy milkweed spreads, it's a dense patch for probably 6 feet from a single 1-gallon pot. And I have runners that pop up regularly, 10 to 15 feet away. So showy milkweed has been really, really successful in my yard. And it does seem that some clones are more hardy than others. So if you're not having luck with one, try another one, or try a different milkweed. You do definitely want to choose locally native species. But try it. I think it's likely that you will be able to get something to establish. Milkweed, aside from monarchs, is great for bees. When it's in bloom, mine is swarmed by different species of bees. It also has when the stems die down each winter, they have hollow stems, and so those hollow stems can be used by some of our cavity nesting bees. So it's a really great plant. Unlike the tropical milkweeds that are sometimes available, our native milkweeds will die through the ground each winter, and these new shoots will come up in spring and rapidly grow up and flower once they're established. My next recommendation are the daisy type flowers. I cheated a little bit here. Flowers plants in the Asteraceae family. All of these daisy type flowers have this open platform that is highly attractive to pollinators. It's the larval food source for the painted lady butterfly, which we sometimes get pretty large migrations through our area. We did maybe in I believe it was 2019, we got a ton of painted ladies coming through, and that was when I had caterpillars, quite a few caterpillars on my Siskiyou woolly sunflower plants. There's, a vast variety of different colors. Some of the plants in the Asteraceae will bloom in spring. There are a lot that are fall flowering, so it can help to extend your bloom season quite a bit in your yard, and I think they're really valuable in addition to being pretty. Manzanita is also really high on my list. Structurally, they're great. They're evergreen. They have amazing flowers. They have this super cool bark that is, red and shiny when it peels all of this old bark off. It's just like, this is the plant that looks good 365 days of the year. And there are lots of sizes and shapes to choose from. Las Politas Nursery's website has a great comparison of different varieties. Calscape also has really great comparisons and descriptions of different varieties. One thing I will warn you about, manzanitas do seem to perform very differently in different soil types. One of our other, another native gardener who is located in the out by Sac State, kind of in a much sandier soil, I would say that her sentinel manzanita, which is this one in my yard, was easily twice the size of mine in the same amount of time. So there can be some pretty wide variance in size. Manzanitas are great for bees and hummingbirds. A lot of them will bloom as early as December, so they provide floral resources really early in the year at a time when there's not much else available. So aesthetically and biologically, very, very nice to have in your yard. Next, I have the lupin. I have trouble growing annual flowers in my yard. They seem to always get eaten, despite whatever protections I use. I've tried, using strawberry baskets to protect them from the white-crowned sparrows. They seem to get around that, or slugs will get into the strawberry baskets. I have a really hard time growing annual wildflowers in my yard. So I have relied mostly on the woody species of lupin in my yard. Oddly enough, all three of these were sold as Lupinus albifrons, which is the silverbush lupin. There seems to be quite a wide range of flower color, leaf size, bloom time seems to be about the same, but they all are really, really attractive to pollinators. The bumblebees love them. They're extremely showy, and they smell nice. That's always one that draws comments from neighbors when it's in flower. One warning is that a lot of the shrubby lupins may tend to be short-lived. I tend to have to replace my silverbush lupins every couple of years. It seems like they end up succumbing to some sort of bacterial or fungal infection. So I'll go, I'll try to have a rotating planting of lupins to always have one in my yard at least. And the last plant on my list is Ceanothus, which is California lilac. Again, they have a huge impact when they're in bloom. People always comment on my Ray Hartman Ceanothus when it's in bloom. It's just this like giant purple monster in my yard. They also come in white flowered forms. This one is Ceanothus popcorn. There are ground cover forms, tree forms, everything in between. So there's something for everyone. I highly recommend having Ceanothus. They can be tricky depending on your watering regime. I have heard people say that they are short-lived. I have so far, knock on wood, not had a problem. But like I mentioned earlier, I do very little supplemental watering. And hopefully that is going to maintain them for a while. So we're coming to the end here. That was my list of 6. I've talked about pollinators and how to plan. But really, my goal for my garden was having something that I would enjoy. And so, this is something that I think about. It's, your garden is there for you. It shouldn't be stressful. It shouldn't be, a chore. It should be something that is planned to suit your needs and your wants for your garden. but you can always do things in your garden to be more supportive of pollinators and wildlife. And I think that should be all of our goals. So that is the end for me. So I think we're going to hold questions for my presentation until after Dylan has shared. Let's see, I want to give a little bit of a bio for Dylan. I met Dylan through the California Bumblebee Atlas, and I've been on a couple of field events with him, and he's come out a couple times when I've been out doing some bumblebee surveys and wanted some company. So I think that he's going to be telling us about the Bumblebee Atlas and how you can get involved. Dylan is a scientific aide with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and he is the CDFW's representative for the California Bumblebee Atlas. Dylan was born in Texas, Dallas, and he graduated in 2019 from UT Austin with a BS in biology, concentrating in ecology. And his interest is in plant-animal interactions with a strong intersection of conservation, community science, and outreach. So Dylan will be telling us about his talk.
Thank you so much, Lesley, for that introduction, and your talk was awesome. That was amazing. I will go ahead and share my screen just to make sure it works. How was that? That's good. All right, so I'm gonna kind of breeze through this, and hopefully everyone can ask questions at the end, and hopefully I can provide enough resources at the end that can answer most of what you might have. But today I'm going to talk about community science with our native pollinators, and specifically our California Bumblebee Atlas project. So I'm going to give a quick overview here. I'm going to talk about the importance of pollinators and native bees, which I can probably go through fast since Lesley did a great job of covering that already. And then I'll jump into an introduction into bumblebees, why we study them in particular. And then I'll talk a little bit about community science and specifically our Bumblebee Atlas project. I can mention a few highlights so far, although we're still getting data in as our season just ended. And then finally, I'll wrap up with a little bit about how to get involved in the project. So to start out very generally, pollination is a crucial ecosystem service. It's a service that is provided by many organisms, vertebrates and invertebrates, and most of the terrestrial life on Earth could not exist without pollinators providing some sort of intermediary. I'm sure many of you can recognize Antelope Valley in this photo, and I'll try to show some other areas in the Central Valley where a lot of our project takes place. So pollinators are crucial for our ecosystem because flowering plants rely on them. And the vast majority of flowering plants are pollinated by animals. Of those animals, invertebrates play an outsized role as they are hugely abundant. And within invertebrates are the insects, which have amongst the largest diversity of species on Earth of any group of organisms. Within invertebrates within insects are the bees, and bees are kind of like the rock stars of the insects. Not to discount any other group of insects, because there are so many pollinators that are important to so many different plants. But bees specifically are super important to our flowering plants because they pollinate a lot of all of our wild and many of our crop plants that provide us with food. So why are bees so important for pollination? There's a few reasons, but the main has to do with the fact that bees eat pollen. And Lesley mentioned this before, but just very briefly, bees provide pollen to their babies as they're growing up, and they need some way to carry that pollen. So many bees have modified structures on their bodies in order to collect pollen as they visit flowers. And we call these brushes of hairs scopa, which means a brush or a broom. And these scopa are made of these cool branched hairs that can hold pollen grains in if once the bee brushes them into these grains. And they're often located on the hind legs of bees, although there are certain bees have their scopa on the underside of their abdomen, and some have it on their face. So it can vary. And the reason bees need to collect pollen is they have to provision some sort of protein source to their babies, and much of the rest of their group, wasps, provide animals to their babies, so they're carnivorous. But since bees diverged from wasps a long time ago, similarly to ants, they evolved to collect pollen instead. So within bees, getting narrower and narrower, why study bumblebees? There's a lot of reasons to this, and I'm gonna try to go through them fast. But one very convenient, selfish reason is that there are a lot of bees. Globally, over 20,000 and counting species. And all of these bees deserve study and deserve respect, and I'm sure that we will learn more and more about them, but we have to start somewhere, and it would take lifetimes to learn just the identification of these, let alone their life cycles. So we choose bumblebees because they're a good model for bees in general, although there are some differences that we'll talk about. They're around 1% of the total bee diversity, and they're fairly accessible to us and the general public. Okay, so the rest of the reasons why bumblebees are great to study is that they are big, fuzzy, abundant, social, generalist, identifiable pollinators in decline. And you'll see a lot of asterisks here because bumblebees and everything in nature invariably has exceptions, and there will always be exceptions to some of these features that we can go over. But just to start with, bumblebees are fuzzy, abundant, and widespread. So here's a general map of the world of bumblebee diversity and species. It's thought that bumblebees originated in Central Asia on the Tibetan Plateau and radiated out east and west, and colonized much of the Americas. And their diversity still remains highest in the higher latitudes and higher elevations, the big mountain ranges of the world. And one of the benefits of having a lot of hair on their bodies, being very fuzzy, is that they're very adapted to these colder climates in higher elevations and higher latitudes. So people often say bumblebees are cold specialist bees. Another characteristic of bumblebees is that they're big for bees. They're relatively big, and that large body size can also help them, much like how a lot of animals in the Arctic and Antarctic are larger, in retaining some warmth when they're flying out in colder areas. They're also fairly charismatic and a great gateway bee into the rest of the insect world. Once you start learning about bumblebees, it's impossible to stop there, and it also helps that they're subjectively cute, and there's a huge there's a huge possibility that people at least know the word bumblebee and have heard of them, at least from their own lives or from contemporaries, or even Shakespeare talked about the humble bumble. Another aspect of bumblebees is that they're social, mostly. Bumblebees in general make annual colonies. So the queen comes out every spring and establishes her own nest and lays eggs, and nests often get around 100 workers or so in their max. These nests are not as big as honeybees by any means, but they get to decent size, and they'll consist of the queen plus workers. And then at the end of the season, she'll start laying male eggs and new queens. And the benefit of sociality with bees is that there will be bees coming out and pollinating flowers over multiple months of the year. So whereas most of the 20,000 species of bees are solitary, they live by themselves, and the single female will have her own nest. They only live for maybe a few weeks of the year, and as opposed to bumblebees that need pollen and nectar for months and months, in some places on the coast, even the entire year. And that can greatly benefit pollination. Another aspect of bumblebees is that they're mostly generalists. So because they're active over such a long period of time, they really can't specialize on any one species or genus of plant if they want their colony to persist for a long time. So you will often see bumblebees using different groups of plants over the course of the year. Like for instance, now most bumblebees are probably, if they're not done with their colony, they're probably using the late season asters for nectar. There are exceptions to this. There's a couple, there at least one species of a specialist bumblebee, but anyway. Another cool thing about bumblebees is that they can buzz pollinate, and y'all may have heard of buzz pollination in the context of tomatoes and other solanaceous plants. Certain plants require sonication at a specific frequency to help release pollen and pollinate more plants. And while honeybees can't do this, bumblebees can, vibrating their bodies at a specific frequency. My boss told me that it's a middle C tone or frequency, apparently. One more aspect is that they're corbiculate. So instead of having a brush of hairs to carry pollen, bumblebees have a corbicula, which means basket, I think, in Latin. And this basket is a flat part on their leg where they can pack pollen into a loaf and take that loaf back to their colony. These are all Crotch's bumblebee, by the way, which is the bee that Lesley had in her garden and can be found in Sacramento. Bumblebees are relatively easy to identify, and I will use that term loosely here, but in terms of the 20,000 bees, there's more guides, there's more references, there's more resources available to identify bumblebees than the vast majority of other species of bee. So bumblebees also benefit from being larger and easier to identify without needing a microscope, mostly. They have very charismatic color morphs where some species are very recognizable just from even seeing them in flight without having to catch them. Although there are some species you do need to catch to see, and that's part of why we're doing this Atlas project. And a big, probably the main reason we're doing our Atlas project is that bumblebees are declining. There's been many studies recently that show that certain species of bumblebees have been losing range, losing habitat, and disappearing from landscapes entirely. So in California, or in the United States rather, at least 25% of our bumblebee species are thought to be threatened or declining. Just for example, Bombus occidentalis, the western bumblebee, used to be found in Sacramento. It used to be all over the valley, and even the Bay Area down the coast. And within the last 20 years, it has virtually disappeared from the entire West Coast, not just California, and hasn't been seen in the Central Valley in probably over two decades. It's one of our 6 species of greatest conservation need here in California. And a final bonus about bumblebees studying them is that in California, we have a fairly diverse cast of bumblebees. We have some very standout species that are very cool to study. Bombus occidentalis, the western bumblebee, being one of them. Bombus franklini being another incredible bee that is thought to be possibly extinct, unfortunately. It was noted about 22 years ago that it was disappearing from certain sites in its range. And it has probably the smallest range of any known bumblebee. It's only in Northern California and Southern Oregon, about 4 counties total. A professor at the University of Davis, Robin Thorpe, studied this bee in particular, and he sounded the alarm when he noticed it was disappearing altogether from his study sites. And this bee really kicked off the bumblebee conservation movement around 20 years ago. And then, of course, the unfortunately named Crotch's bumblebee is just an awesome species and is kind of emblematic of California in that it's nearly endemic to it. Its range is almost only in California and nowhere else. It gets into Baja a little bit in Nevada, but it's mostly a Californian bee, and its range is also shrinking rapidly. It used to be all over the valley, and now it's showing up in pockets, but not nearly where it once was. Oh, there we go. So another question that I want to answer is, why are we doing a community science project to survey bumblebees? And the answer to that is that California is really big. California is too big for us to survey by ourselves. We really want to survey every corner of the state to find what bumblebees are there and how they're doing, what abundance they have. But we can't do that by ourselves. We're too few and far between. So we really need the help of locals, people living all across the state who are willing to spend their time and travel and learn and help us inform the data about our native bees. So that reason is sort of why the Bumblebee Atlas project exploded. The Bumblebee Atlases are run by Xerces. There's a number of them all across the United States. The Pacific Northwest Atlas in particular has been running for 5 years now and has collected a huge amount of data across the tri-state area, and has led to our atlas in California getting started this year, actually. So a little bit about the California Bumblebee Atlas. We started this year as a collaboration between the Xerces Society for Insect Conservation and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Our goal is to recruit and train volunteers to survey bumblebees across the state in order to collect data and inform our demography about how bumblebees are doing, and hopefully help conserve them in the future. So a little not teaser, but a little tidbit of how the project went this year. We're still collecting data. People are still entering. I know I need to still enter data, but a few things. We held 11 field events in person this year, including one in the CNPS demonstration garden at Soilborn. We had 4 virtual trainings and 1 multi-day workshop, which was a ton of fun. We've trained over 200 volunteers to survey across the state, and you can see all of these surveys, all these points were done by volunteers this year. They've uploaded at least 1,500 bee records and many more coming, and have seen 22 of the 25 species of bumblebee in California, which is fantastic. The last 3 species are incredibly rare and include Franklin's, which may or may not still exist, unfortunately. But it's been a fantastic season, and it just ended September 1st. So I can't wait to see what else we find. Finally, I wanted to just give a little bit about how to participate. I don't have enough time to go into this more in detail, but just quickly, if you wanna participate in the Atlas, it's completely free. All of our trainings and our workshops are free. What you need is time and the ability and the transportation needed to go out and survey for bees. So to participate, you will take a training and then adopt a grid cell. And we've broken California into these 200 grid cells, and you can choose any one you want, whether it's local or whether it's really far away. You can choose as many as you want as well. We had some volunteers adopt like 10 or 20 grid cells, but you only have to do one. And we ask you survey twice within that grid cell, anytime during the bumblebee season. While you're surveying, we also ask volunteers collect plant data. So we want to get the floral association that the bees are on for our data. So every bee that we catch, we will have a plant species that it was caught on with it. And then finally submit your data online to Bumblebee Watch. The next field season starts next March in Southern California and goes all the way through September 1st. I really hope everyone who is able can participate. Again, most of this information about how to participate can be found at the website down here below. Everything you would want to learn about it can be found at the website. And we really hope to expand the project next year, offer many more trainings, twice the number of in-person workshops. We hope to offer more t-shirts for free to people that come to in-person events, and vials and handouts, and any sort of question answering that you can. And we really want to hold them across the state so that you can attend a local event wherever you live. So finally, I just want to say a big thank you to Sacramento Valley CNPS for inviting me to talk, and Lesley especially. Thank you to everyone involved in the Atlas, especially Leif Richardson, who's the lead of the Atlas with the Xerces Society, Hillary Sardinas, who is the pollinator coordinator at CDFW, and Rich Hatfield, who is the leader of the National Atlas Project at the Xerces Society. If you need any questions, please go to the Atlas website or feel free to email me as well. And thank you.
Thank you, Dylan. I'm going to come back and try and facilitate some questions. Thank you both. That was a lot of fun. I think most of us plant people are also kind of secretly bug people, so, and especially flying bug people like bees and butterflies. So I'm going to scroll back up through the chat, and I think there was a
I did want to mention, I highly recommend getting involved in the Bumblebee Atlas. It was a really, really great experience for me this past year. And I don't think you mentioned this, Dylan, but the trainings that were presented this past year are recorded, and they are on the Xerces Society YouTube channel. So if you are interested in getting a jump start on, learning about bumblebees or getting ready to participate for next year's Atlas, those resources are available, and they're great.
Thank you for that, Lesley. Yeah, I remember when you did the training and then got to start catching bees and not freezing them, but it looked like a lot of fun. So the first question I think is for you, Lesley, asking if for the swale, does the rainwater drain off the swale or does it absorb into the soil?
I think it does absorb some, just the duration of time that the water, stays on my property as opposed to running off. I do definitely think that there is some infiltration, but you may have noticed that my yard is actually slightly elevated above the street grade. And so there is some drainage through that brick retaining wall, and some of it does drain out. So it'll, all have water draining out through that brick retaining wall, probably an additional 24 hours, after rain events that I will see across the sidewalk. So I think it's both.
Mhm. And then someone asked if you could name some plants as you went along, which I think you did, but if anybody has any specific questions, let us know in the chat and maybe Lesley can answer. There was a question, what is the blue tree in one of the yard photos early in the slideshow? I think it was probably a ceanothus, and how old is it?
The ceanothus, I think, went in around, those were probably put in 2012. I let them grow for a couple years because they were purchased as, 1 gallon, 2-gallon plants. And so I let them grow for a couple years and then I started pruning them up. If you are a member of either the CNPS Facebook group or the Sacramento Natives and Wildlife Gardening Facebook group, I think I've put some sort of progress posts in both of those groups. So if you're looking for those, or if you want to, message me or anything, I can help you look for those.
Yeah, those are fun groups if you're on Facebook. Chris Lewis asked if you used BT on red humped caterpillars. They attacked her red buds.
I have luckily not had red humped caterpillars in my yard, but I have seen some pretty bad infestations of those in the UC Davis Arboretum before. It should be just as effective on red humped caterpillars as it is on the Genista broom moths.
Okay, scrolling. Lots of nice comments. I think this might be for Dylan. Is there a species of bumblebee in Sacramento that is nearly all black? I see 2 types of bumblebees in my yard, one that looks nearly all black, but probably has some yellow somewhere, and one that is predominantly orange and hairy.
That's a great question. And that could probably be answered with Lesley's photos, actually. There are no bumblebees that are entirely solid black, but there are certain species that can have the yellow hairs kind of brushed off with age. So you can sometimes find a yellow-faced bumblebee where it's just had a rough life and the yellow hairs on its face have been kind of cleaned off and it'll look all black. But in general, the all black bees in Sacramento are usually carpenter bees, the larger ones, the 2 species that Lesley mentioned. Even some of the carpenter bees that were shown have a little bit of yellow on their thorax. But if you see a bee and it doesn't have hair on its abdomen, it's shiny, that's a carpenter bee.
Yeah, I get those guys in my yard in Yolo County, and they're very striking. They're large, but
they're gorgeous.
Yeah. And then I think the Q&A had a few.
Mike Brady had a question that I wanted to talk about a little bit. And he asked, what do you do when everybody walking by your yard says that they love what you've done? Mostly natives, no grass, but nobody in the neighborhood duplicates it or even asks about doing it. My neighborhood is very much, looks like my yard before I did any of the conversion. Some of the things that I have done, in 2019, I hosted the SacValley chapter's Gardens Gone Native tour in my yard. That's a garden tour of 20 plus gardens around the Sacramento area that are at least 50% native in varying stages of development or establishment. We are looking for somebody to take on the native plant garden tour. We've been on hiatus, since COVID. But we are looking for somebody to take that on. It's a great opportunity to talk to your neighbors, talk to other people in the native plant community. It's a really fun time. The other thing that I did, I've hosted the Miraday native plant truck. So that's a food truck that has been modified to sell native plants. Again, that's a great way to get your neighbors to buy native plants. And they may not go full native gardens, but you can they're buying them, and so hopefully they are going into their yards and making a difference. So getting to know your neighbors and to basically put the native plants in their lap, so to speak, are good ways to get your neighbors to get on board.
Yeah, that's a good question and a good answer. For us too, one thing I've done is give away seeds from our native plants, and people will take them, especially the poppies. And I have noticed, little patches popping up around the neighborhood where folks have taken seeds and sprinkled them out on their yard. And yeah, I think it's going to become more popular as the drought continues. All right. Oh, I better go to the top. Okay, so Mike is asking about maybe removing a scarlet oak that's infested with aphids when it's drought stressed. I don't know that we can answer that, but
one thing that I would mention is, if it is consistently having pest problems that can't be managed, it's likely that it's not a happy plant to begin with, or a happy tree. So maybe removal, is something to consider.
Yeah, and replace it with a native oak if you want an oak.
Yeah, I will say that in my yard, I ended up keeping the non-native camphor tree in my yard. It's well established and doesn't really seem to, or it seems to get along with my altered watering regime. And so, it's one of the non-natives that I decided to keep, just because, replacing a large structural tree does take, a fair amount of time, and the birds, really like it. It's not providing, a larval food source necessarily for our native insects, but I do still feel like it has value in my yard, and so I've left it.
Yeah. Tara asked Dylan, do you have any recommendations for bumblebee ID resources? Do we still have Dylan?
Oh,
uh-huh.
There you
go.
I'm muted. That's why. Yeah, sorry about that. These are my recommendations for bumblebee identification. The book on the left, Bumblebees of North America, is the most comprehensive guide to bumblebees currently. But in terms of bumblebees of California, there are some books. Gretchen Laboon has a book just of bumblebees of California. And then on the right-hand side, there's a key to the workers, which I think we also have on our website in higher detail too. And if you do want to explore more bees besides bumblebees, I would recommend these 3 books, especially The Bees in Your Backyard. That is a fantastic resource for learning about bees in general.
Yeah, I have that one. It's really good. Nice pictures.
Definitely.
The Xerces training videos too are really great.
Absolutely. Yeah, Xerces has a lot of great resources on their website if you type in xerces.org.
Mm-hmm. All right, Lesley, how many years after starting your garden did you start to notice native pollinators utilizing your garden? Did it steadily increase, or was there a certain year when you noticed a large increase?
I would say that it was pretty quick that I started noticing, these are not just honeybees. But I would say that the diversity has definitely increased over time. I get lots of native bees that are nesting on my property. I have an area on the west side that is bare dirt, and I do get lots of mining bee nests in the ground on areas that are not mulched. So, a lot of people tell you, leave areas unmulched for bees. It's true. They will use it. And Julia, I think you might have actually come out to my house to do some pollinator sampling with Miraday before. I think it might have been you, Julia. But yeah, seeing lots of stuff. It's fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we noticed leafcutter bees nesting in our yard like the first year that we had not grass there.
I actually get a lot of bees nesting in my remaining lawn as well.
Mm. All right. Joe has a mining bee question. He has a large colony on a large dirt patch in his yard and was thinking of planting some plants in that area. Will that destroy their habitat, or will they build around it?
Dylan, I don't know if you have any information on this. I would say maybe you don't want to plant when they're actively nesting. Because I have done it, and I still have lots of bees, but I don't really know how many baby bees I'm squishing. So I try to avoid it. But I think leave them some space, but I think they'll kind of work around what you're doing.
Yeah, I would echo that entirely. It's your space. Like if you want to have plants there, I'm sure the bees will move and occupy other spaces.
And Zach wants to know, how do you spot a bee's nest in the ground? That's a good question.
Are you talking about bumblebee nests? I think
it doesn't specify, but
yeah.
yeah.
I definitely see, I showed photos of the chimney bees nests and some of the mining bee nests. They're, you'll actively see bees coming in and out of those little burrows. So that's one way. A lot of the solitary bees are not necessarily social, but they are colonial. So you'll have lots of solitary bee nests in a sort of concentrated area. So yeah, when you spend hours a day in your yard looking at your plants and insects, you'll see them.
Definitely, I noticed when I was just in my driveway, a bee go into the crack in my sidewalk, and I guess it had its nest there somehow.
Yeah, that's how we noticed the leafcutter bee nest in our yard too. We just noticed a bee fly out of the ground when we were hanging out in the front, and then we looked closely, and we could see the little hole. And then I've studied leafcutter bees, so I'm most used to looking for them. But there'll be like a little mound of soil just outside the entrance hole, and that's once you kind of hone in on like that visual, you can start looking around for more. I think it just takes observation. I don't know if there's a good like photo resource for bee nests. That'd be cool. It did exist. Maybe a master's project for somebody.
Yeah.
Bug Guide, Bugguide, is a good web resource. If I think if you were to look up specific types of bees, it's kind of a photo atlas. I think a lot of them could have photos of nest entrances and things associated with those species accounts or family accounts.
One more question from Mike. He says, I've been able to manage yellow jackets mostly with a trap, but are they providing a service too?
Oh yeah, definitely. Sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I could just mention that as long as you don't have tons of yellow jackets, like going into your sodas while you're sitting outside, yellow jackets help with the caterpillar problem that many people have been mentioning. They feed their babies, instead of pollen, they feed them animals, and often they love squishy grubs like caterpillars. So if you see yellow jackets, you probably have less herbivores and caterpillars in your yard.
One more question. For the lupine deaths, was there any warning signs before it had to be replaced? Oh, so Lesley, you were talking about your lupins having to be replanted.
Yeah, it's usually pretty quick in my experience. One day it'll look fine, the next day it'll look sad, and then the next day it's dead. So that's why I really think it's probably a bacterial or fungal issue. And it's just, all of a sudden, basically the water system in the plant basically is just broken and it just dies. Yeah, not a lot of warning. I just try to keep a rotating conveyor of lupins. I start a new one when I think that one is getting older and might be lost. And at least now they're, most native nurseries are carrying silverbush lupins, so it's not as hard to find replacements. I'm generally not patient enough to try to grow them from seed myself. And like I said, I have a hard time growing things from seed, but they just tend to get eaten. Lupins are another species that, or another group of plants that snails and slugs really love them when they're young, and they can definitely mow them down pretty quick.
Yeah, delicious. Okay, no more in the Q&A. And yeah, Tara's commiserating. Her lupins don't last that long either. I think that's all the questions. Did another one just pop up? Nope. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. And thank you, Lesley and Dylan. This was really fun for our first fall meetings. That's my child. Yeah, and thank you again. And thanks everyone for the great questions.
Yeah, thanks for joining. And hopefully you can join us again next month for container gardening.
Yes. And we do record these meetings. So if you have somebody that wanted to attend but couldn't, it should be up on our YouTube page in a little while. I'm not sure how long it takes.
We're obviously having technical difficulties, so it may be a little bit longer than normal.
Yeah, we'll probably get the plant sale going before we worry about uploading meetings. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks so much.
Bye.